John Lennon was seen as the man of peace, the dreamer who sang about a better world. But behind the calm words and round glasses, there was a man with fire in his heart. Lennon could be sharp, cruel, and brutally honest. While he often laughed and joked in interviews, deep inside he carried anger towards certain people in his life. He once admitted that love and hate were very close for him. And among all the rivalries, betrayals, and disappointments, there was one person who stood above the rest, someone Lennon truly hated more than anyone else. The story is not simple. It's full of friendship, betrayal, competition, and scars that never healed. To understand why Lennon's hate burned so strongly, we need to go back to his youth, to the early days of the Beatles, when everything seemed possible, but jealousy and resentment were already growing in the shadows. In the late 1950s, John Lennon was just a rebellious teenager in Liverpool, trying to form a band. He wasn't alone. Another boy stood by him, equally passionate, equally talented. At first, Lennon admired him. This person had musical skills Lennon lacked. Together they wrote songs, shared dreams, and built the foundation of the Beatles. They pushed each other, but also quietly compared every chord, every lyric, every reaction from the crowd. At first, it was healthy competition. Lennon needed him as much as he hated to admit it. But behind the smiles, John felt threatened. The bond between them was strong, but it was also fragile, built on rivalry more than pure friendship. And that tension grew bigger with every passing year, setting the stage for a conflict that would never fully heal. When the Beatles exploded in the early 1960s, the pressure was like nothing anyone had seen before. Lennon's partner in songwriting was now sharing the spotlight with him. Fans screamed for both of them, but sometimes Lennon noticed the cheers were louder for the other one. John, who prided himself on being the leader, started to feel like he was losing control. Interviews often painted them as equals, the two heads of the band. But Lennon hated equality. He wanted dominance. He wanted to be seen as the true genius. Fame didn't bring them closer. Instead, it made their rivalry sharper. Every success of the other felt like a knife to Lennon's pride. The tension, once hidden, was now becoming obvious. Lennon couldn't stand the idea of sharing his crown, and his hate started to grow quietly, waiting for the right moment to explode. At the heart of the Beatles was the famous Lennon-McCartney partnership. But behind the credits, the truth was different. Many times, Lennon would write a song alone, and so would his partner. Yet, their names were always printed together. Lennon hated this. He wanted recognition for what was truly his. Even worse, when his partner's songs became global hits, Lennon felt humiliated. He thought, why are his ballads loved more than my raw songs? To John, every chart success of Paul McCartney was like salt in an open wound. John wanted to be seen as the heart of the Beatles, but Paul's talent kept stealing the spotlight. It wasn't just about music anymore. It was about ego, identity, and power. Their partnership had turned into a Cold War, and Lennon's hatred was reaching its peak. By the late 1960s, the cracks in the Beatles were no longer hidden. Lennon openly clashed with McCartney in the studio. Arguments exploded over song arrangements, business decisions, and even personal choices. Lennon once shouted that Paul was trying to turn the Beatles into his backing band. To Lennon, Paul represented control, rules, and manipulation, everything John hated. Their friendship had turned into open hostility. Lennon felt suffocated, like Paul wanted to run the entire band by himself. The breaking point came when Lennon decided he no longer wanted to play Paul's games. With Yoko Ono by his side, John began to pull away. He wanted freedom, even if it meant destroying the greatest band in history. And deep down, he blamed Paul for every ounce of his misery. When the Beatles finally broke up, Lennon didn't hold back. He launched some of his harshest words against Paul in interviews and even in songs. In his solo track, How Do You Sleep?, John openly mocked Paul, calling his music shallow and meaningless. The world was shocked. Fans knew about their rivalry, but hearing John's venom in lyrics was brutal. Paul didn't respond with the same anger, but John kept pushing. He wanted to humiliate him, to crush his confidence. It wasn't just artistic criticism. It was personal hate spilling into public view. Lennon couldn't forgive Paul for what he saw as betrayal, and he used every platform to make sure the world knew it. To John, Paul wasn't just a rival. He was the enemy. Despite the public attacks, the truth behind closed doors was even messier. Lennon often complained about Paul to his closest friends. He would rant about Paul's perfectionism, his fake charm, and his constant need to be in control. At times, Lennon admitted that Paul was a brilliant musician, but instead of admiration, this only fueled his hate. John couldn't stand needing Paul, even after the Beatles. Every time Paul released a hit song in the 1970s, Lennon felt overshadowed again. He once confessed that competing with Paul haunted him, even when he tried to move on with his solo career. Hate, for Lennon, was mixed with a strange kind of respect, but he would never admit that out loud. To the world, Paul was still the man John Lennon despised the most. As the years passed, Lennon softened slightly. In the mid-1970s, there were moments when he and Paul spoke again. They even considered writing together once more. For a brief moment, the walls of hate seemed to crack, but it never lasted. Old wounds ran too deep. Lennon couldn't fully trust Paul, and Paul couldn't forgive John's cruel words. Their relationship became a cycle of brief connections, followed by long silences. It was tragic. Two men who had built history together, unable to simply be friends. Lennon may have joked about moving on, but deep inside, his hatred toward Paul was never truly gone. It was carved into him, part of who he was. In his final years in New York, John Lennon often spoke about peace and forgiveness. But when it came to Paul, his tone was complicated. He sometimes admitted he missed their partnership, yet other times he called Paul insufferable. Lennon lived in contradictions. Love and hate were always tangled in his soul. Just months before his death in 1980, Lennon still couldn't resist mocking Paul in private conversations. For all the peace he preached, Paul McCartney remained the one man who could bring out his deepest bitterness. It was a wound that never healed, even in his final days. John Lennon truly hated Paul McCartney more than anyone, but that hatred also shaped music history. Their rivalry pushed them to write better songs, to outdo each other, to create some of the greatest music the world has ever heard. Without that tension, maybe the Beatles would not have been as legendary. Hate fueled Lennon's creativity as much as love did. In the end, John and Paul's story wasn't just about friendship or rivalry. It was about two men forever linked, unable to escape each other, bound by music and haunted by bitterness. Lennon's hatred was real, but so was the bond. And that is why their story remains one of the most powerful tales in rock history.